Peace be to you. In the problem of evil. Let us begin with the question.
Kia ora, now mai haramai to another episode of Eucharistic Catholic, the Evangelion podcast, where we dive deep into the heart of our faith, exploring stories, traditions, and teachings that shape our lives as Catholics. My name is Dominic, as you all know, and I'm going to be interviewing Deacon Harold this episode. We're going to be talking about the Eucharistic Congress. We're going to be diving deep into what does this mean for us as Catholics? What happened at the conference? How did Deacon feel about it? And how can we change our lives to be more focused on the Eucharist today? Because the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. So how do we refocus on it? How do we change our lives as Catholics to bring about a better understanding of the Eucharist around the world? Brilliant. Okay, welcome to the podcast, Deacon. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah,
great to be here again.
It's been a while, hey. But you were just in Australia recently, weren't you?
Yes, yeah, I did a 12-day speaking tour with my former spiritual director. He was instrumental in helping me make the transition from my secular job to full-time speaking apostolate. So it was great to share that time with him and to speak at all the different places that we did in Sydney and in Melbourne on this trip. And also, I refilmed a series called The Greatest Commandments, which is a marriage enrichment program. We had released it about 10 years ago, and it needed to be updated and refreshed, and so we did that while we were in Australia as well.
Okay, so that's through Perusia?
Yes. Yep. Through Charbel and Perusia, absolutely.
Cool. Jason Everett recently did a tour in Australia, and he had quite a few problems, like a lot of spiritual attack. Did you find it was a similar situation?
Well, not as bad as him, although I did have someone threaten to punch me in the face. I gave a talk on theology of the body. And this individual who claimed to be a Catholic school teacher. So the way the conversation that was occurring during the Second Vatican Council, I said yes. And he goes, what do you think about the conclusions that they reached? I said, it doesn't matter. He's talking about the Commission on Contraception. I said, it doesn't matter what their conclusion was. What matters is what the document that came out by Pope Paul VI as a result of that, which was Humanae Vitae. That's what we have to focus on. He goes, yeah, but the conclusions of the commission. I said the Pope says, and the Holy Spirit speaks through the Pope, and the Pope is part of the teaching authority of the Church, and that's what matters. He said, well, I'm a Catholic school teacher, and we teach safe sex in the schools. I said, you're not a Catholic school then. I said, because if you're not teaching the Catholic faith, you're not a Catholic school. You're a Protestant school, or you're some other private school, but you're not a Catholic school. And he got mad. And then when he saw he wasn't, because he was, what he's trying to do is get me all amped up and all excited, which I've done this long enough, not to be intimidated by folks like that. And so he, when he saw he wasn't getting a reaction out of me, he said, well, are you a Democrat or a Republican? I said, actually, I'm neither. I'm independent, which I am. I'm a registered independent. It means I can vote for whoever I want. I'm not beholden to any one political party. He said, okay, because if you said you were a Republican, if you were in favor of Trump, I was going to punch you in the face. And I was so stunned when he said that. Charbel was standing right next to me.
Sorry, you just cut off at the end of that. So Charbel was stood next to you, and you were pretty stunned by it. It's quite remarkable that, you're in a different country, man. Why are they talking about politics? There's so many things we go into about that. What's going on? But yeah, so yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. We've had Jason Everett had his whole tour over there, and he did a really interesting interview with Catholic Answers and a few other people where he went into depth on what happened there. You've obviously had a similar experience, not as spiritually attacking as Jason Everett, but still that presence. And then obviously I did an interview with our very own Brendan Malone last episode about the Olympic opening ceremony. So there is this real kind of attack on Christianity that's almost kind of become acceptable in the world. But then on the other hand, something that I think is being quite overlooked is recently you were part of the Eucharistic Congress in the United States. It seemed amazing. Could you tell us a bit about what that was like and, you know, what you got up to whilst you were there?
Yeah, sure. So the Eucharistic. So what happened was, coming out of the pandemic, the U.S. bishops set up a 3-year plan to revitalize people's faith in Jesus' real presence in the Eucharist. So, and part of that was at the end of year 2, during year 2 of this process, they would have this Eucharistic Congress. We haven't had a Eucharistic Congress in 50 years, maybe a little longer than that in the United States. And so they decided to have it at this convention center in Indianapolis, which it was the middle of the country. So people coming from all over, that would kind of be a central place they could meet. And it was large enough to hold, more than 50,000 people, because it's next to what American Football Stadium, which holds, I think that venue holds 80,000, 70,000, or 80,000, something like that. And so they decided to have it there. And so it was very well organized. There was a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of joy. People were very excited about it. And it was a great privilege to be part of that. So I did several things while I was there. I did a number of book signings with the different publishers that I have there. I did meet and greets as well. I am the kind of the American spokesman for Harvest Journeys, which is a Sydney-based pilgrimage company, which now opened up an office in the United States. So I'm kind of the face of Harvest Journeys for the pilgrimage community in the United States, which I'm very excited about. And they had a good presence there at the Congress. I did a talk for EWTN. I was on a panel with Father Leo Patalinghug, and just talking about the current state of the culture and the place of the Eucharist in the culture. And then I gave a break. Well, I guess as a keynote address during one of the morning sessions. So the evening sessions, like the ones that Jonathan Rumi and Bishop Barron and Father Mike Spitz spoke at, that was the group with everybody, 50,000, almost 60,000 people. My session was a main stage session in the arena, but it was a what they call an impact session. So what they did was they had during the 3 days, they had 3 impact sessions. So one was about the foundations for belief in the Eucharist. Then the next day was, what do we believe about the Eucharist in the real presence? And then the last day was, okay, now that we're filled with the Eucharist, how do we go out and evangelize and witness to the power of the Eucharistic faith in the world? And that's where I was slotted. So they paired everyone up, and I was paired with Dr. Ed Shree. And our job was to go and share with people how, now that we understand who Jesus is in the Eucharist, how do we share that faith with Jesus with others? And so that was about 35,000 people at our presentation. And I did a number of interviews and some other things. I did my radio show, my EWTN radio show, Beacon of Truth. They had a booth set up, and I was able to do the show for a couple of days live from the Eucharistic Congress, which was great. Overall, I thought it was very, very well done. The Mass, the final closing Mass, there were Cardinal Tagle, who was the former Cardinal Archbishop of Manila, Philippines, is now working in Rome and Pope as kind of his delegate to the Eucharistic Congress. So he said the final Mass at the end, which was awesome. So yeah, it was very, very well done. And I hope that here in the United States we continue to see the fruits of that Eucharistic Congress for many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not great on social media, but like there's people talking about it all over, even in New Zealand. So like, thank God for the internet and social media and stuff. We can have such an amazing impact on the world. We're called to do, preach the gospel to all nations and make disciples, and we can do that quite a lot easier than the original apostles could. So, I mean, 35,000 people you were speaking from, I can't even fathom that. I mean, I think the biggest event I've run here is maybe 1,400, 2,000, and that's a Station of the Cross we do every year through the city, and that's pretty amazing. Everyone's like, "Wow, look how good we are." But 50,000, that's got to be like the whole population of Auckland or something. How did it feel like when you were in the arena during the Mass or during adoration with all 50,000 there, or even when you were speaking? What was that like?
Yeah, so adoration was awesome. I mean, there was a mix of during the procession. There was a mix of music, but I'm more of a quiet adoration person myself. But I appreciated, what they were trying to do as they were walking Jesus around. But when they placed him on the altar, and it was a time for silence, I mean, 50,000 people, you could hear a pin drop. It was amazing how silent everyone was in awe and reverence before our Lord in the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist. It was a powerful moment. All the nights that they had adoration. And then the talks that were given by some amazing folks, Father Mike Schmitz, of course, and Bishop Barron, and Jonathan Rumi, and the astronaut who brought the Eucharist up into space. So I didn't even realize that happened. But the astronaut. I mean, it was just great. And I did get a chance to meet Jonathan Rumi in backstage. And so nice guy, very unpretentious, down to earth. Is a lovely guy. So but it was amazing. And then speaking in front of that, people, the largest crowd I've ever spoken in front of prior to that was in the Philippines, and there were 25,000 there.
Wow.
So this was obviously more than that. But there's that nervous excitement that you get. Yeah. It's like when I was wrestling in high school. I get nervous before every match, and I'd run out to the mat, and then the ref would blow the whistle, and then all the fear would go away. It's just time to go to work. It's time to focus. So same thing. I was nervous, looking at, and I actually took some photos of from backstage looking out on that many people. But when they do the introduction, you walk out there, okay, it's time to go to work, and the Holy Spirit takes over, and you just do, what God asked you to do. The hard part for me was keeping it in the time limit. Right. They only gave us 25 minutes. I'm like 25. I'm just getting warmed up in 25 minutes. But it was good. I actually finished in 24 minutes. Wow. So and they were they wanted to be very strict about the time. So, but it was a great experience. I had a wonderful time. Met so many fantastic people. Rekindled some friendships to some of the speakers that I'm friends with. I haven't seen in quite a while. To be able to catch up with them and spend time with them was awesome. But overall, just wonderful event.
Yeah, I can imagine the logistics of keeping everybody on time, because I've run conferences before and they almost never run behind. It's, we're half an hour behind, so we'll just do this, And I can't imagine doing that with a 10,000 behind 35 or 50,000 people. I can imagine the people in control were just when it was over, I bet they slept for a week. I think there's a lot I want to talk about, but I know you've got time, you've got other meetings to go to. I wanted to dive into this idea of revival. It's a word that was bandied about a lot at the conference, and I think it's a really interesting concept because when we have big events, sometimes it's just a peak and then a trough, and there's just nothing afterwards. But it seems to me that the idea of this was, let's start something off and let's let it continue. I don't know much about revival. It might just because I'm only like 15 years old as far as Catholicism's concerned, and I've moved around from England to New Zealand. Maybe we don't do revivals over here. I don't know. But I know I've heard a lot of it in the States. So could you just give us a brief of like, what is a revival? Is this a revival? Yeah, start there.
Yeah, so let me explain it this way by giving a little bit of context. So the first person who taught that Jesus Christ was not present in the Eucharist was not Martin Luther. Right? When you ask people, everybody says, well, it's Luther, of course. Like, actually, no. It was an archdeacon named Berengarius of Tours, who was the first one to teach that Jesus was not present, body, blood, soul, divinity in the Eucharist. This was the end of the 10th century, beginning of the 11th century. He was excommunicated, but he was schooled about Christ's presence in the Eucharist, and he came back to the faith. He had to sign, Pope Paul VII had him sign Oath of Fidelity. In fact, you can read that Oath of Fidelity in Pope Paul VI's document, Mysterium Fidei, the Mystery of Faith, in paragraph 52. He has an excerpt from what Berengarius signed when he came back to full communion with the church. Beautiful Eucharistic theology. So what that event did, it started a revival. So it wasn't that faith in the Eucharist was dead. It was more like it was just like, it's become kind of ubiquitous. It's just, okay, whatever, let's go to mass. And, but Berengarius had started to people started to question the church's teaching in this area. It started questioning whether Jesus was really present there. Well, how could a piece of bread be God and all of that? So what this did was, when Berengarius came back, it started this resurgence of emphasis by the church on the Eucharist. Some of it, I think, was try to repair some of the damage that Berengarius had done, but I think the Pope saw it as an opportunity to revitalize the church, and this revival went on for 200 years, and so it went on even with Pope Urban. So what happened during that 200 years? That's when we saw Eucharistic processions really starting to happen in the church. It was during that period that we saw the monstrance being used, because before they had done kind of adoration with ciborium. But now there was the monstrance, monstrare in Latin means to show, right? So it's a word that was used by women who were pregnant and they were showing, so they started using the monstrance. And of course, Eucharistic adoration before the monstrance grew. And then in the next couple hundred years, Pope Urban commissioned some songs to be written for adoration and for devotion to the Eucharist. And so he commissioned songs to be done. And some of these songs were O Salutaris, Tantum Ergo, Panis Angelicus, which to this very day are kind of foundational Eucharistic hymns for us as Catholics. Well, who wrote those songs? St. Thomas Aquinas. So a lot of people, of course, know St. Thomas Aquinas for the Summa Theologica, the Summa Contra Gentiles, his commentaries on Scripture. So that's what he's most famous for, his incredible intellect. But he also had a beautiful heart for the faith as well, and that shone through in his love for the Eucharist and those beautiful Eucharistic hymns. And it was also during that time that the Feast of Corpus Christi started as well. And so now fast forward to our time. Here we have, before the pandemic, at least in the United States, 69% of Catholics did not believe that Jesus was present, body, blood, soul, divinity in the Eucharist. 69% did not believe that Jesus was present. And then the pandemic comes, and of course, the bishops instituted a mandate that you did not have to attend mass because of fear of getting sick or something. And so people stopped going to mass. And I remember the indult didn't say um, that you had to watch it on TV, right? It just said you didn't have to do anything. It really said you didn't have to do anything. And so so the faith in the Eucharist began to wane. Even it was bad before the pandemic. It was even worse afterward. People stopped going. People want to come back to church.
Mm-hmm.
When the indult was lifted and it was time for people to come back, they didn't want to come back. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of trepidation out there. Plus, they really didn't believe it was Jesus in the first place. So what are they coming back for? So I think all of that was an impetus for the bishops to start this initiative in the United States for Eucharistic revival, Eucharistic resurgence. For us to fall in love with Jesus by focusing on one of the foundational truths of our faith, that Jesus is present, body, blood, soul, divinity, Eucharist, to reestablish a personal, intimate relationship with him in that blessed sacrament. And so all of this 3-year plan, and then the Eucharistic Congress was part of that. And then now comes the fruits, right? So they've been following up with emails. They've been following up with ways for people to stay engaged. They're already planning a Eucharistic procession next year from Indianapolis to Los Angeles. You're already talking about doing another Eucharistic Congress now. Like in 2033 is when they were saying. Why? Because Jesus died at 33, so it's gonna be the 2000th anniversary of Jesus' death and resurrection. So I'm hoping this bears tremendous fruit in the life of the church here in the United States.
Yeah, I think sometimes people have kind of they're a bit cautious when it comes to like, let's do a big event with big speakers, and then people get lost in the event. I've heard like some criticisms also. When you have a bigger event, often the Eucharist isn't as revered as possible. We heard stories about the World Youth Day of like Tupperware being used and such like. So people hear about that and they're terrified about running big events. But I think from what I'm hearing, what you're saying, revival is a Catholic tradition. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's something that has been necessary, and it's something, I guess it touches on that humanity where we can become complacent and we can forget about something. I remember I was reading into the history of the Eucharist a bit, and it said that initially it started out, there wasn't necessarily even a tabernacle. It was just carried around by hermits and stuff who kept a type of adoration, but eventually it became synonymous with being in convents and such like. But then it becomes one of those things that just the Eucharist in just the convent, so the revival really isn't an event, so to speak. It's a change of heart. It's being able to view the world differently, and having that kind of, I don't know, God's worldview, seeing like God in all things. So it sounds like this thing's going to go on for 200 years. Is that right?
Well, I doubt if it goes on for 200 years, but what I'm hoping that it does is that people's faith in the Eucharist will be re-energized. They'll be willing to share their faith about Jesus, and their encounter with him in the Eucharist, especially in adoration, will become normal. And it's I could see it's hard in this culture, and a culture that's broken, that's hurting, that's confused, that is trying to redefine things, redefine marriage, redefine gender. And why is it doing that? It's trying to make them, instead of being made in image likeness of God, they're trying to make God in their own image and likeness, is what's happening. Which speaks to that my next book project is going to be tentatively titled it's looking at the interrelationship between the temporal and the transcendent. So, for example, you have people that say, I don't believe in God. There's no supernatural. Unless you can see, taste, touch, and measure and quantify something, it's not real. Invisible Worlds. That's the working title for the book, Invisible Worlds. So you have those people on one side, but at the same time, you look at at least television in the United States, you see so many shows about vampires and zombies and witches and supernatural. So if you don't believe in God, you don't believe anything, then why are these shows so popular about the dead living? And the Eucharistic, obviously the Eucharistic connection, the vampires drinking blood and zombies eating flesh in order to stay alive. When Jesus, that's make believe, but Jesus truly gives us his flesh and blood. So I think that the culture is longing and yearning for truth, and the truth is Jesus Christ. And that's the nexus between the invisible world. The incarnation was the nexus between the invisible world and the visible world. And so the book is going to be just talking about that whole dynamic and relationship.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned some of it in your talk. I watched it on YouTube, talking about the vampires, and I think that's such a neat symbolism that we don't even realize is doing. And Chris West calls it like twisted mystics, when songwriters actually say something that's true and deeper about God. But yeah, so I think, well, like as Catholics, as we're going forward out of this revival, I mean, personally, what I would like to try and aim for is, recreating that revival over here, because, we can look at it as like, oh yeah, the Americans, they do everything big. We're Kiwis, we're very unassuming and quiet hobbits type creatures. But like the Eucharist is the same over here in New Zealand as it is in America, as in Africa, Australia, all over the world. And so I guess maybe if you got any tips for us on two things, how do we create that revival in our own hearts personally, and then how do we share about the truth of the Eucharist to someone that's maybe like on the fence, but then also people that like they don't even know there's a fence. So have you got any ideas around that?
Yeah. So for the first part of your question about how do we find that love of the Eucharist within ourselves, the best thing I could say is Eucharistic adoration. See, when God created us in a natural moral law, there's a space in our hearts that are reserved just for God, and that's the place where God can touch you. So many people don't find fulfillment and joy and peace to the level that they desire it, because they're not opening themselves, allowing God to touch that space that He created for Himself in everybody's heart. Right. So what we have to do is drown out the noise and distractions of the culture and focus on God's voice speaking to us. That's why it says in Psalm 46 verse 11, be still and know that I am God. And the word there in Hebrew is yaldah, which means knowledge that's gained by experience. So you can translate that, be still and experience God. Right, in that stillness and silence and quiet. But we're very uncomfortable with silence in our culture today. I mean, look how everybody's walking around with iPods on, and they have devices in their hands, and they're so distracted that they don't really take the time to think deeply and seriously about where they are in their relationship with God. Is there even a God? And if there is a God, why should that matter to me? They don't see God is inviting them into a relationship of intimate, personal, loving, and life-giving communion. And I think Eucharistic adoration is the place where you go to block out all those distractions. You can focus on what God is saying to you, because ultimately He wants you to become the person who He created you to be. There's a reason why you're here at this time and in this place. So I think Eucharistic adoration is a place to fall in love with Jesus again. I really believe that with all my heart. The second part of your question, what you can do as a country, you don't have to do anything as big as the United States. I mean, there's 300 million people in the United States, so we have a tendency to do things very big because of we have the population base. But I do something smaller. maybe just 5,000 people. Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, but just do something.
Yeah.
Just do something. And there were people there at the revival who were not Catholics, who were Protestants, who were searching. They were just so intrigued that many people would come together, talking about, John 6, what they believe is just metaphorical, but to see that many people come together with the actual belief that Jesus is present, truly present in the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, and that when they hear stories in the history of the church how people have died protecting the Eucharist, they died rather than deny Jesus and the teachings of the faith. I think that sparks something. People say, wait a minute, there's something there. They don't recognize what it is, but there's something there. So having a Eucharistic revival, no matter how many people come, is an invitation to invite people in to share the love and the truth of our faith that we have as Catholics.
Yeah. So when you say revival, do you mean just like actually, obviously have the adoration, but do you also need like that formation element? Because of you guys had all the speakers, and part of the skeptic in me is like, oh yeah, it's just kind of like wanted to see some celebrities, but like these celebrities just happen to be priests, bishops, people that are very well formed in the faith, and so there is a deeper purpose behind it. So yeah, when you're talking about revival, it's not just a party that everyone's turning up to. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. It's the beginning of a deepening relationship. So the revival, that if you want to think about, that's kind of the kickoff event. Yeah. All right. So that was the inaugural event to get people going, get people excited. But then what? Our parish is going to be meeting in small groups. Our priests continue to preach this from the pulpit. Are we going to hear more Eucharistic centered homilies? Is this something that's going to be focused in adult education and faith formation programs? Our teens in the teen programs in Catholic schools, are they going to be emphasizing this beautiful truth of Jesus present in the Eucharist? Because I think the more devotion to the Eucharist we have, I think the better things will be in the world. No question or doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah, I was thinking that as I was, as this was happening, I was looking at all the horrible things that were going on in the world. It just made me realize that more and more that actually a Eucharistic revival is the answer to whatever problem you put out there. If we have a deeper understanding of the Eucharist, we have a deeper understanding of life, of what's actually happening in the world. And it's definitely inspired me to be like, right, I need to first change myself. I need to make sure that I have a sacramental worldview. Because I think one thing I learned early on in my faith journey, like I said, I've only been Catholic 15 years, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the church, hey? One thing I learned is that if I'm focused on the truth will come to me. I found myself in a few situations where I was having to explain the Mass to friends of mine that didn't believe in God, and I had answers, but I had no book learning. And then I had checked on them later, and they were correct. So, I think, having that center as, the Eucharist is real. It is the presence of Christ, and therefore I am going to go spend time in the Eucharist. That kind of gives you the answers you need, as well, huh?
Yeah, and with your friends who aren't people of faith, you're not proselytizing. You're not arrogantly trying to force them to believe what you believe. And in a sense, you're not even trying to convince them about, because ultimately the Eucharist, belief in the Eucharist is faith, is your faith. So you can have all the intellectual arguments, you can do all of that, but if the person doesn't have faith, they will never accept Christ present in the Eucharist. So what we have to do is introduce people to this most blessed sacrament by faith, and then let God do the rest. God can really work on hearts and minds and souls if we allow Him. He can do miraculous things in our lives and the lives of our families, and ultimately the lives of our church and culture.
Yeah, and I suppose it's just looking at that circle of influence, really, of like whose heart can you touch the most, and it's yours. So evangelism starts at home. Mm-hmm. It's just the home's right in your chest, and you need to make sure you're on the right level. I know, because since I've been looking into this, I've been thinking more about a
Yes.
sacramental worldview, and something that we have, as well as the sacraments and the blessed sacraments, we have like sacramentals. And so I'll be at work and I'll see someone with a rosary around the neck, and my perspective before looking into this was like, so he thinks he's Catholic. He's got a rosary on. It could be like a medallion or something,
Yeah.
as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
But then I was like, actually, no, that's a ladder to heaven, and he has that around his neck. So whether they realize it or not, I realize it, and I think that's something, a really important first stepping stone.
No, absolutely. Because you can't give what you don't have. So the only way to really pass on to others belief in the Eucharist is to witness to the power of a Eucharistic faith in the world. What I call living Eucharistically, taking what we receive in word and in sacrament and taking that out to be Eucharist to the world. That I think that's absolutely key. And the more we can do that, I think the more effective that will be in helping people to think through what's going on in the world and why they just can't accept everything that the world offers them. Because ultimately, it's about not the truth. It's not about me. It's about the truth that sets me free to become the person who God created me to be. Right. And that's free. That's where the true freedom comes from. That's where the peace that we're all searching for comes from. That's where mercy and love and justice all flow from that reality, because it's from Christ himself, who's God. So the more we can do that, I think the stronger the church will become.
Brilliant. Do you have any tips on how we can start getting into that mindset? Are there any resources or any kind of prayers we can say or activities we can start doing to jump on that journey?
Well, first thing is prayer. I mean, how can you get to know someone if you don't talk to them? I mean, I'm sure when you met your wife, you just saw her in a book and said, well, that's her. I'm going to marry her. I love her. I know everything about her because I saw her picture in a book. No, you actually have to talk to her and get to know her, right? And that's the way you do it. Same thing with faith. Getting people to know Jesus through a life of prayer, or even just having someone pray with you, or say, hey, is there anything I can pray for you for? So you're not in saying like, come to church with me. Maybe they're not there yet, but just say, is there something I can pray for you for? I mean, that's harmless and and unintimidating. Just asking for prayer, no big deal. And adoration, like I mentioned before, prayer and adoration, those two things, and fasting, right? So Jesus says there's some demons that can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. That's the triple threat, if you will: prayer, fasting, and adoration. Embracing that silence. I think Cardinal Sarah's book on the power of silence is a great book to understand the power of adoration and just quieting ourselves down so we can listen to what the Lord God is saying to us.
Yeah. I think when I first started reflecting on the Olympic opening ceremony, I was like, what's the best response? And I found myself like slightly frustrated when I found myself realizing, the best response is not to yell at them, say something, go and attack. It's actually be quiet, in fact, be silent, and go and find the Eucharist, and just go be in front of the Lord. And again, because if everyone was doing that, if the artist that was doing the opening ceremony was doing that, this wouldn't be a problem. And maybe if enough people were doing it around him, he'd be influenced again. And so it's kind of frustrating because it's like, what's the best thing to do? Just do nothing first, and then we'll let God, prompt you to do this.
Yeah, because when you think about it, why is that happening? You have these, especially in the art world, you have artists that are doing pictures of Blessed Virgin Mary covered with feces. You have there was a statue someone pointed out to me that the Blessed Virgin Mary giving birth, like you actually see her exposed and the Jesus' head is crowning and all that kind of stuff, is like, well, okay. And when you see things like the Olympics or when they curse God on television, they'll never do that to the Muslims. They'll never do that to the Buddhists or the Hindus. You never see them mocking, like on television, Jesus Christ. Why is it not Muhammad instead of Jesus? Okay, why was that Muhammad? They won't do that. Why? Because even this crooked and depraved generation, as St. Paul says, they know who the real God is. And that's the God that they mock, and that's the God that they ridicule. The real God, who is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, again, it just keeps coming back to that. Is like, people say they don't believe in God, but they act as though they don't believe in God. And that means there is an acknowledgement, even if it's on like a subconscious level. And I suppose what we need to do is we just need to act the exact same way as them. Act as though God exists. And, I think that's the first starting point. I remember I did a podcast, maybe years ago now, talking about the Eucharist. And it was looking at St. Thomas Aquinas and how he reacted to the Eucharist. Because he is, like you said, known for his intellect. And so this guy is, smart, to say the least. So he's not an idiot. He's not going to be like convinced by bad arguments. But he is... the stories of him celebrating the Eucharist, of him being in tears, when he needed inspiration, sticking his head inside a tabernacle. And so I guess like we need to have that same perspective. So then the revival, as much as we want to do a massive event, get 50,000 Catholics to turn up, it's like, why don't we start the revival right in our hearts and then see what God wants us to do?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's
exactly.
that resonates with what Tim Glemkowski, he's the CEO of the Congress, he did a talk and he talked exactly like that. God called him to this, and like it's the 10th one in the States. So, I don't want to take any more of your time. I know you've got to go if you're a busy man. When is your book coming out?
Oh, not for a while. I mean, I'm still writing it, right? I'm still doing the outline and getting it all together. I did 6 books since 2015, but since then my speaking apostolate has grown tremendously. So I have less time to do books as I had before. So I'm still writing, but I'm doing articles and things. Like I just did a project with the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, where Scott Hahn is, and that project is coming out in September. They just told me. So I filmed it last year. So I've got that coming out. I've got the tour with the Perusia speakers coming to the United States. So we're going to be doing a almost 2-week speaking tour in the U.S. So lots of irons in the fire. So I'm still writing. It's just that it's hard to, especially when all my resources are here. You see just a few of the books actually that are behind me. That's not even all of them. And I can't take them with me on the road. So it's one of those things, like when I have some time, I can sit down and write. So it'll probably be at least a year before that book sees the light of day.
Well, you've got 6 other books and a bunch of series coming out. Where can people find out about this information and maybe get in touch and get some of it for themselves?
Yeah, just very simple. DeaconHarold.com has all the information there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for your time, Deacon, and thank you all for listening. If you want to have a Eucharistic revival, if you want New Zealand to be set on fire with the Holy Spirit, go find your local parish, get in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and get on your knees, because that's where he is, and that's where we'll find him, and that's how we'll change the world. So thank you for listening. God bless.